Billson here, Tri-City Sports. Now, I've been mispronouncing my next guest name. It is Schuyler Dixon. He is an Associated Press sports writer down in the Metroplex, Dallas, Fort Worth, that sort of area, Frisco, Arlington. And he has just written a story that I read on the internet, and I'm sure a lot of newspapers around these parts picked up, about Elizabethton's own Jason Witten and his comeback. And can this be successful? Well, he's returned after a year of Monday Night Football to color commentary to play for the Dallas Cowboys, a record 16th season, Dixon notes. And, tell us about this minicamp. How did Jason Witten look? Do you think he's going to be a productive player in his comeback?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, to me, he's the starting tight end again. There's been a lot of talk about, how much time he gets, and they've got a lot of several young tight ends that they really like on this roster, and obviously with the young guys, they want to develop them. But I don't think there's any question that Jason Witten will get to the lion's share of the playing time. He looks the same to me. All his numbers in terms of the way he, the kind of workout stuff he had to do with the Cowboys coming back, all those numbers were just as good or better than they were when he left. He's obviously a pretty unique individual in terms of getting himself ready and keeping himself ready. So I don't think that part of it was very hard for him at all, and he just kind of dropped right back in, almost like he'd never left. And he is running with the first team. There was a play yesterday during the first day of minicamp where he did sit out as a snap with the first team. So it did happen, and it will happen some, but he's going to play plenty, and I do believe that he will be the leading receiver for this tight end group for at least this one more year.
Now, he did play with Dak Prescott for 1 year. I mean, the friendship and the connection that he had with Tony Romo is Cowboys legend for all those years. But, there was a period of time where Witten, you could count on him maybe catching 100 balls or so. How many realistically do you feel that he can catch this year? What kind of an aspect, what does he bring to the Cowboys offense this year?
Well, I think the biggest thing he brings that they lacked last year because they just didn't have the experience at tight end was sort of a safety valve for Dak Prescott and a third down guy. I don't think people necessarily look at tight ends as third down guys. You think of sort of speedy guys in the backfield as third down backs or whatever, but Jason Witten has always been a very important third down guy in this offense. So that's one thing to look for. I don't think the numbers are going to be off the charts. I'd say 500 catches. I'm sorry.
That'd be impressive, yeah. But
I was thinking 10 times 50 there. So 5 catches a game for the balance of the season. You're looking at something in the 60-70 catch range, maybe. I think it's kind of hard to put a number on it. The yardage, I think somewhere in the vicinity of that times 10, 600, 700 yards receiving. I think those are really solid numbers. I think everybody would be happy with something like that. And the most interesting number to look at going into this, you mentioned the record 16th season, which means that assuming that he plays, which I think is a safe assumption, I don't think any significant injury is coming between now and then. Assuming he plays, he will be the club record holder for seasons and for catches and for yards receiving. And the question will be, can he break Des Bryant's record for touchdown catches? He's never been the most prolific tight end in terms of scoring. When you look at historically some of those guys, Gronkowski is the best one to compare him to. Gronkowski kind of blows Jason out of the water in terms of touchdown catches. So that was never really Jason's thing as much as it was durability, playing every down, being one of the best two-way tight ends in the league, et cetera, et cetera. So it'll be really interesting to see if he can get the end zone often enough to threaten that Des Bryant record.
How much longer do you think Jason Witten is going to sign up to play? I mean, he's 37, and tight end is a physical position, but do you think it's 1 year, 2 years, 3? I mean, has he expressed any indication of that to you, Schuyler Dixon?
We have not asked him that, or I haven't yet had a chance to ask him. I do believe it'll definitely be a year-by-year thing. You know, he signed a 1-year contract, and if he re-ups, it's going to be the same thing. It would definitely be a year-to-year thing. I think it's going to have a lot to do with how this team does.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he didn't make any secret about the fact that besides still wanting to play, that the fire was still burning, as he likes to say. The other thing that led him to come back was he really thinks the Cowboys are good enough to go to the Super Bowl. He obviously watched them, you know, from a distance, which is an interesting point of view for a guy who's played that long, to be able to sort of step back and watch it through a different lens. You know, but he's watching those guys, and they win a playoff game, and even though they lost to the Rams, you know, he comes out of all that thinking, you know, they've got a young core on offense, they've got a young emerging core on defense. This team appears to have all the pieces. I still want to play. I spent 15 years chasing a Super Bowl, and the one regret he expressed in his retirement ceremony was looking Jerry Jones in the eye and telling him, "I'm sorry I couldn't get you a Super Bowl, and you know, I hope that what I did was still worthy of everything that you showed me through the years." So that's clearly what he wants, and he clearly sees that the opportunity is there. And they're not going to say this, but I feel like it really crystallizes the expectations that surround this team. When you've got a guy like Jason Witten coming back and basically saying, "I'm back because I think we can go to the Super Bowl."
Do you think that he is the difference between the Super Bowl or not? I mean, I'm still trying to think, let's see here. You know, do they have enough weapons around Dak Prescott? Is Dak Prescott good enough? Those questions surround the Cowboys. What are your thoughts? Is Witten that final piece of the puzzle?
I don't think he's a final piece of the puzzle. I think he's an important piece. I think it's good for this offense to have him back. This offense was really bad in the red zone last year.
Mm-hmm.
That would change, I think, automatically with Jason Witten. So I don't, you know, at this stage in his career, you can't call somebody like Jason Witten the final piece of the puzzle. I think he is a piece, an important piece. You know, I think that Dak's going to be really happy to have him back when all is said and done, when he gets out there and gets in those, you know, tough situations, and he knows he's got Jason Witten out in the pattern for him. The question of whether Dak is good enough, that's the biggest question mark. You know, I don't think there's any question that he's shown he is good enough, but the bottom line is until this club breaks through and gets to the NFC Championship game again, which is now almost 25 years since they've done it. Until that happens, those questions are all going to be out there. The only way to answer it is for him to lead them there.
Sure.
They clearly believe that he's the guy to lead them there. He's going to get paid that way sometime before too terribly long. So now he just has to go out and prove it, and they as a team have to go out and prove it.
And Schuyler Dixon, I got to tell you, when the Cowboys drafted Prescott in the 4th round, I did think they got a steal. How many quarterbacks lead Mississippi State to the number 1 ranking in the country? And I think that his play in his rookie season, what the Cowboys did show that, you know, there's a lot of potential there. But what is the potential for Jason Witten? Because I'm trying to think about athletes. A lot of them have attempted comebacks, and a lot of them have failed. Now, I was thinking Michael Jordan coming back after baseball. That was successful, but not so much with the Wizards. Mario Lemieux for 1 year was really good with the Penguins, but his career fizzed out after that. Randall Cunningham, you know, he sat out a year and then led the Vikings to 15-1 that 1 year. But then again, that was short-lived as well, although give him the 15-1. But are there any other players that maybe could be a model for Witten's comeback at all that you can think of?
I can't think of any off the top of my head now that you mention it, but I do think that I think it's a little bit different with Witten because, for one thing, he's in a little bit more of a sort of complementary role, a secondary role, a supporting role. You know, he's not. Although he has the big name and he's going to get a lot of attention and he's going to be playing his 16th season and all those sorts of things, you know, the engine that runs this offense is the young star pairing of Dak and Zeke. So I think that this becomes a little And I also think he wasn't out very long. I don't think it took him very long to get back in shape. All indications are that it's the same old with him. So, I think his impact will be measured by how far this team goes. That's it. I mean, that's all that matters to him. I think that's all that matters to a lot of people inside this organization. If they don't get really deep in the playoffs, there's going to be a lot of disappointed people, and then it gets back to your question earlier: does he want to try to do it again? Because clearly, this isn't the be-all, end-all this year. It's still a very young roster, and there are several young guys on this roster that are about to get paid, and the Cowboys are about to commit financially to basically the core that you see right now. And so it becomes a question of how long Witten wants to do that. And I also don't think that he retired pretty young at 36.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's 37, and I still think that's fairly young. I think it's not impossible to consider that there's at least a year, maybe two more. I'm trying to remember how long the Tony Gonzalez's of the world played, but I know that he played a long, long time, and so I could see where Jason could be doing this for another year or two, and I think it's worth noting along those lines that he got this opportunity from ESPN, and he watched the whole Tony Romo thing unfold a year earlier, where Tony basically was forced into the decision of, this is, I don't know if you want to call it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but these people are telling me they're ready for me now, and if I don't do this now, when am I going to do it? And I think he had this exact same situation. ESPN, they had seen how successful Tony was, and they thought they could get the same thing with Jason, so they sort of threw the whole thing at him. Do it now, take this now, we want you now, we don't know if we'll want you again next year. So he was kind of backed into a corner when maybe there was at least a part of him that wasn't quite ready for that, and clearly that has turned out to be the case. There was a part of him when he was going through all this last year that wasn't sure it was the right thing, and so then he was just honest with himself, and here he is back again.
Schuyler Dixon, I remember when the announcement was made, and I was very surprised because I have done a feature story myself on Jason Witten and did not come away with thinking that was a sportscaster's personality or a very, real articulate, that sort of thing. Now, that was 15 years ago, or now I guess 16 years ago when he was coming out of Tennessee into the draft and all this, but I always thought that might have been one of the reasons why. I remember he was projected first, maybe early second round, and he dropped to the third, and I always thought that might have been the reason. But the last question I want to ask you, are we having this conversation at all if last year the Cowboys don't see Dallas Goedert taken the pick ahead of them in the second round, the tight end from South Dakota State that went to the Philadelphia Eagles? If the Eagles select anybody else, do the Cowboys take Goedert, and maybe we're not having this conversation?
Yeah, that's a good point. There was little question that the Cowboys were very interested, and that there were multiple times that they had sort of the player yanked away from them, if you will, and that was one of them. And yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know that we can really ever have the answer to it. I don't know how. I guess the question would be, how much would he had been a part of that offense had he been here? It may not have been much. The Cowboys, because of the way their offense has been designed, probably would not have been one to go crazy with a rookie tight end right away, to where all of a sudden the Cowboys were in a completely different situation. And this sort of gets into one of the other things that I think is important about this Jason Witten thing, because when he first said he was coming back, of course, the initial reaction from a lot of crazy Cowboy fans was, oh, well, what about Tony? Coming back. Tony's coming back. Well, what people wanted to ignore was the huge difference between those two situations. One of them was that Tony Romo had been replaced. Dak Prescott had replaced Tony Romo. That's why that went down the way it did. The Cowboys did not replace Jason Witten. Yes, they drafted a tight end a little later in the draft than what you just talked about. They really liked Blake Jarwin, and at the end of the regular season, he showed why. 3 touchdown catches in one game. They remain intrigued by Rico Gathers, although I do think time is beginning to run short on him. So there's no question
Really?
Because
Okay.
if you just assume that Jason Witten decided the fire was too strong, the broadcasting thing wasn't necessarily for him, which I do think is another part of this that hasn't really been spoken about much, but I do think that was a factor. I do think the Cowboys would have welcomed him back. They would have told whoever they had on their roster, look, he's coming back. We're going to figure out the playing time thing. Don't get your feelings hurt. Everything's going to be all right. And we're better off with Jason Witten in here than we are with Jason Witten not in here.
Well, he's Schuyler Dixon. Read The Fire Still Burning. Witten wants his snaps with the Cowboys. Just do the Google search for that. The Fire Still Burning. Witten wants his snaps with the Cowboys. Tell you what, why don't I link it up a little bit later on today on the 1420 WEMB Sports Radio Facebook page. Want to thank you for your time. When we come back, Greg Brown, Pirates announcer, talking about all this bad blood between the Buccos and the Braves after this from Asian House. Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate your time here.